Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the live Q&A with me, Professor Michael Scott. It is the 21st of March. The winds of politics are swirling around us, but for this half hour, let's leave that aside and enjoy the ancient world. Thank you, as ever, for your great questions that have been coming in through the week, and we've got some stonking ones to answer this week. In fact, we're starting with the theme of childhood. If you remember from last week when we were coming live to you from Belfast, we got caught up with a question from William, age 8, who was asking about what kind of childhood toys one might have and what in ancient Greece and what might happen to them. Did they get sort of broken, ceremonially broken when you ended your childhood? But we've had some more questions coming in about childhood in the ancient Greek and Roman world. Hello, Paul from Shropshire. Hello indeed. And good afternoon, Linda. How are you doing? Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. So the first question that came in live last week that we didn't have a chance to answer on air was from Claire, asking about, did young Roman women leave a doll at the family shrine before they got married to indicate a transition to adulthood? And yes, this was a kind of thing that happened both in the Greek world and the Roman world, that children, particularly women, as they were reaching the age of marriage, they would go through a whole host of ceremonies, one of which was taking a doll ceremoniously to a sanctuary in the Greek world, the sanctuary normally of Artemis, the goddess of young women, and would leave it there as an offering to the goddess as part of that transition before they went off to get married. But that was actually one of a number of ceremonies that ancient women went through during those transitions between childhood and marriageable age. And we know about this from Aristophanes, the ancient comic poet Aristophanes, who in Lysistrata talks about women doing particular religious roles at particular ages. And this leads to one of the most famous and yet bizarre ancient Greek festivals known as the Arctea. Hello, buonasera, Sia. Hello, Judith. How are you doing? Hello, Debbie. How are you doing? Thank you so much all for tuning in. Great that you could be here this week. So yes, we are talking about ancient rituals of childhood, and particularly in the ancient Greek world, we're talking about the Arctea ritual, which happened at the sanctuary of Brauron. Now, the sanctuary of Brauron is just outside of Athens. It's a sort of kind of on the edge, if you like, of the contemplation of Athens' territory, and it's a wonderful sanctuary of Artemis where this festival happened, the Arctea. And what does Arctea mean? Well, it comes from the Greek word arctos, meaning bear. So, this is a ceremony to do with the goddess Artemis. It's a ceremony performed and a ritual performed by young women who are probably, young women in ancient Greek terms, but actually to us still very much children. We're thinking about 10-year-olds probably, at the limit, somewhere between 5 and 10, who were performing one of the most important rituals that they went through before they started puberty and thus became of marriable age. So the Arctea, and we're not quite sure, some scholars argue this was really only for the sort of elite daughters of Athenian society. Some argue that it was for a much wider range of women from across Athenian society. But they seem to go to the sanctuary of Artemis at Brauron and spend some time there doing something to do with bears. So we think they dress up as bears, that they become a part of the wilderness, they become a wild animal as to symbolize their transition between childhood and moving through to become women and to become marriable women. So to move in Greek terms from Parthenos, a young maiden, to a guner, to a woman and to a wife. Alexis, you're off to Athens in a few weeks. Great. How you might try and squeeze in a visit to the sanctuary. Absolutely. Brauron's a fantastic site to go and visit. Not only a really interesting temple, but a really interesting actual kind of sanctuary layout where there's a number of dining rooms, ancient dining rooms. So there would have been festival and ritual dining going on at this sanctuary as well. So really worth going to have a look, not least for the stunning scenery around it. And in the museum is a stonking collection of beautiful votive dedications, plaques that with these exquisite reliefs on them that were dedicated to the goddess at one time or another in the Archaic and Classical period. So it's really, really worth going to. Make sure you get into the museum as well, Alex, if you get a chance to go there. Yeah, so we have this, responding to Sean's question about kind of, did women leave dolls in sanctuaries before they got married? Yes, they did, but that was the culmination, if you like, of a whole series of rituals that they went through at different stages, from the ages of 5 through to 10, then to puberty, and then to marriage. Kind of back to the wallpaper. Yes, indeed. Thank you, the Classical Association of Northern Ireland. Helen, lovely to see you. Yes, we're back to the wallpaper, but not the jazzy wallpaper, the more calmer, relaxed kind of floral note wallpaper this week. Where are we next week? Who knows? Somewhere in the UK, but the week after that, I am in New York. I'm going to be talking at a conference in New York on unknowability in ancient history for the Centre for Public Scholarship, so keep an eye out. Hopefully we're going to be able to do a Q&A with you live from New York. I'll have to work out what the timings will be exactly, but keep an eye out for that. And also keep an eye out, while I remember, I need to remind you of a competition, or a launch rather, a competition that we're going to be doing on the Facebook page in the next couple of weeks, because it's very exciting. We are tantalizingly close now to 6,000 followers on the Facebook page, which is a huge achievement, and kind of fantastic that you all are here kind of engaging and sharing your love for the classical of the ancient world. When we hit 6,000 followers, I think we're currently at something like 5,948, so 50 or so to go. When we hit 6,000 followers, we will set up a post on the page inviting you to like that post and to celebrate our 6,000 followers. And all of you who like that post will automatically go into a competition for a chance to win a signed copy of My Ancient Worlds book. We will then be choosing at random a winner from the people who have liked that post after a certain amount of time. We'll give you 24, maybe 48 hours to like that post, and then we will be choosing a winner, and you will not only get a signed book with any dedication you so choose, but also a short video as well from me saying congratulations and thank you so much for taking part in the Facebook page. So yes, we are tantalizingly close to 6,000 followers. Let's hopefully put ourselves over the edge. It's not quite the same level as the Brexit revoke Article 50 petition that's been doing the rounds, and I hope you've all signed, that's now well over 500,000 signatures, but 6,000 followers I think we should be very proud of as well for the Facebook page. So do encourage your friends to follow the page, get us over the 6,000 mark, and then when that post goes up celebrating the 6,000 followers, do like it as soon as you can to be in with a chance of winning a book. Hello Pedro, hello Zio, fantastico, grazie mille Zio. So thank you very much then for that question about childhood. And we had another question about childhood as well from Sarah Scotty, who was asking that she writes children's stories and likes to read fairy stories from other cultures, and you're currently reading about Baltic and Russian traditional children's stories. Please do, Sarah, tell us about some of these myths and stories that Russian and Balkan children are reading. How different are they from our own, for instance? One thing I've noticed in reading with my daughter, I always speak to my daughter in French and have done since her birth, and so we read a lot of French stories as opposed to English stories. And one of the things I've noticed there is that the wolf, in English kind of child stories, the wolf is always the baddie. There are no good wolves. But in French stories, the wolf is often a fun, nice, and kind of quite engageable character. So my daughter, as a result, absolutely loves wolves, but try to find a cuddly toy wolf in the UK is extremely complicated. Because there are no stories to accompany, no child in England seems to want a cuddly wolf toy except perhaps my daughter. So we've had to source one from abroad. So it'd be really interesting to know what are the key differences you see between Baltic and Russian childhood stories, and everyone else as well. If you've grown up with different childhood stories from a different country or a different part of the world, please do let us know what you think are the big differences or the key identifying features of what make children's stories from a particular part of the world unique to them. Sebastiana, do I speak German? Not enough to be able to talk to my daughter in German. I have to read in German, obviously, for doing archaeology, because particularly in the Greek and Roman world, German archaeologists are extremely prevalent and kind of working very hard on a number of important sites like Olympia, but certainly not as an option to speak to my daughter. My main languages are French and Italian. I speak on a regular basis. Hello from Indonesia. Lestari from Indonesia. Welcome to the Facebook Live Q&A. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. Please do send in a question. Anyone can send in a question in advance of the Q&A to the Facebook page, www.facebook.com/Michael Scott Academic, or you can send a question direct to michaelscottacademic@gmail.com, or indeed you can ask a question live. So Lestari, do let us know your questions about the ancient worlds and ancient civilizations as well. So Sarah's asked about what kind of children's stories were there in the classical era? What were the ancient Greeks and Romans, for instance, reading to their children? This is a fascinating question, got me really thinking. Because on the one hand, if we think in the Greek world for a moment, it would depend very much on whether you're a boy or a girl. So we know that they get maybe kind of treated together and sort of looked after together until their age of 5 or 6, but after that boys and girls in most places are on pretty separate paths in terms of the sorts of education they're receiving. Girls, the priority would have been cooking, embroidery, weaving, taking care of the house. Boys, a much wider education span that could have been both out in a kind of more of a school context, or perhaps if it was a rich family with a very skilled slave that was employed as the kind of tutor. But that would be everything from reading and writing and memorizing famous poems and pieces of epic poetry, through to rudimentary rhetoric and philosophy, through to obviously more physical stuff, sports, fighting as well. But it depended also on whether you were in Athens or whether you were in Sparta or whether you were in any of the other Greek city-states, because they all had slightly different emphases on education. In particular in Sparta, for instance, women, we know, got much more of an education. They were reading, they were writing, they were taking part in sport, because men, when they were off doing their kind of warrior training or indeed away fighting all the time, left women in much more important positions within the cityscape. Rajrupa, children's stories in India would be abridged versions of the Hindu myths. Absolutely, okay, really, really fascinating. So again, the myths tying into some of the cultural and religious background of the community. And we see that, I think, in the ancient Greek world as well, that particularly with the boys being asked to memorize particularly famous and important poems and chunks of epic that would be, and then kind of also copy them out as well. We see kind of examples of this that have survived where people are copying and recopying or having their errors corrected in copies that they've written of particular texts, that there were sort of famous canonical works that children were supposed to be familiar with and were supposed to learn from. Those and with the Greeks, that we can imagine that the myths that we tell, the ancient Greek myths that we often tell and retell for both children and for adults alike today, would have been a rich, diverse kind of a body of material for the ancient Greeks to tell to their children as well. So I think there's something really quite nice there, that just as we tell these myths to our children, we are in fact doing something that would have been done and has been done in many centuries before, is dating all the way back to the world of the ancient Greeks. So that's a really, really great question. I'd love to sort of have a bit more of a think about it actually, as to whether there were defining myths, that were defining kinds of stories that the ancient Greeks told to their kids. I think particularly for boys, and particularly again in those key poems that were identified, it would obviously be around what made a great warrior, kind of how one achieved fame and immortal glory, all of these sorts of things. I think that's definitely food for thought, and I'm thinking that the University of Roehampton at the moment, I think, has a project running about childhood in the ancient world, and it'd be interesting to talk to them about what their perspective is on the key childhood stories that children were fed to bring them up in the right way to be an ancient Greek. An ancient Greek boy, for instance, was given their first sip of wine at age 3, so you can imagine that the stories about Dionysus would have been flowing from an early age. So Sarah, thank you very much indeed for that question. Absolutely fantastic. Rajrupa, it's interesting to know that every region has something special to add, although the story remained the same. that's really interesting as well. So every kind of region is just slightly tinkering with the story to make it a little bit special, a little bit individual, a little bit related to that particular homestead, which is absolutely fantastic to see. So do please let us know kind of this, what are the stories that they're telling in Italy's ear, for instance. What do you learn about? What are the key features of Italian childhood stories? Or from Indonesia, Lestari, what do the kids get told as stories in Indonesia? I would be absolutely fascinated to know. So great questions so far, kind of thinking about childhood and the experience of childhood. It didn't last very long. If you got past the very high risk of infant mortality in ancient Greece, sort of 1 in 4 children making it past kind of being an infant, not succumbing to kind of one of the huge range of infant mortality causes in the ancient world. And then you had a relatively short childhood before you were on your way to becoming more of a young adult, and particularly for women, the moment they hit puberty, they were of marriageable age and often married soon after. So certainly by 13, 14, you could expect to be married, often to a man who was much older, probably in their mid to late 20s. So kind of in that sense, it was a relatively brief childhood, but still one, we hope, that was filled with joy and enjoyment of the great Greek myths in particular that we still enjoy today. So we're going to take a quick break from questions. We've talked about the competition for once we hit 6,000 followers, and I also wanted to flag what's in the news. I hope you've been enjoying this one as well, that from The Guardian, the Nile shipwreck that's been discovered, and this is quite interesting because they've discovered in absolutely apparently fantastic condition a boat, a particular kind of boat that hasn't no physical remains have been found of before, and it's a boat that's kind of known as a balis, and this is interesting because Herodotus described in his histories this kind of boat being used on the Nile, but historians looking at it have gone, wow, that doesn't sound very practical, it doesn't sound like that could possibly work, we haven't seen any examples of this, so people have sort of tended to distrust Herodotus as a result for this particular piece of his narrative, and yet here we are, suddenly out of the blue, physical remains of this particular kind of boat that Herodotus rather intricately described. So once again, as the Guardian article has it, Nile shipwreck proves Herodotus right. There we go. Kind of fantastic. So that's great to see. I'm sure Herodotus, wherever his grave might be, is smiling and very, very happy about this fact. But it kind of ties in with a question that's come in from J. Matthew Reaver this week about these kinds of moments when kind of something which is thought to be outlandish or impossible from the ancient Greek or indeed the ancient world more generally is kind of suddenly, having been thought impossible for generations, centuries perhaps, kind of suddenly is proved true. And how much should this make us rethink the kind of scholarly dogma that goes, oh well, Atlantis, it doesn't exist. And yet, of course, we're all fascinated by the search for Atlantis, and there's program after program about potentially identifying what Atlantis might be in terms of the physical remains of it somewhere in the world. And J. Matthew Reeves' question is kind of, are there growing concerns in the academic community regarding long-held beliefs that are more and more being proven false? So I guess the question is, are we kind of increasingly comfortable with doubting ourselves or doubting when we categorically say that something can't possibly be true, and always leaving the door open just a little bit more for potentially things might change from one day to the next? Well, I would hope that is very much the case. I would hope that we are never stupid enough to think we know everything, and that we are kind of always recognizing the fact that tomorrow, as with the Nile boat, something could be discovered, some piece of archaeology could be dug up from under the sea or under the earth that could change our perspective. Hello from Sao Paulo, please. It's raining. It's raining in Sao Paulo. Oh my God, it's just past the first day of spring here, kind of the first day in the UK where, or indeed kind of in this hemisphere, where the days are now getting longer, kind of we're on our way towards the summer. And I should also wish you all a happy Persian New Year. as well. That's happening today. So lots of things happening today. It's an exciting day all the way around. So happy Persian New Year to everyone as well. Hello, Christina. How are you doing? Thank you so much for joining in this live Q&A with me, Professor Michael Scott. So we were talking about J. Matthew Reever's question about should academics be more wary about categorically ruling stuff out. And yes, I think we should always be a bit more careful than we have been, without getting caught up in the programs and ideas that aliens built the pyramids, or necessarily that Atlantis is a real place waiting there to be seen. I think we need to be cautious and critical of all of our sources and all of the possibilities and all of the ways in which we can interpret this material. But I think we also need to realise that we can't ever really rule anything out. And I'm working on a really interesting example of this at the moment, which is to do with the Delphic Oracle. In fact, when I go to New York and deliver my paper at the Unknowability Conference in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be talking about how we deal with unknowability in history. And one of the things that is an unknown is exactly how the Delphic Oracle functioned, because we don't have a single source from the entirety of its 1,000-year history that tells us exactly how a consultation of the Delphic Oracle took place. What we do have is a number of different sources from different time periods, and one of those is to do with the Romans, or Roman era sources, talking about gases emerging from the ground, and somehow the Pythian priestess at Delphi breathing these in and becoming inspired by the god as a result. And so when they went to excavate the sanctuary of Delphi in the late 19th century, in the 1890s, they were utterly sure that they were going to find in the middle of the temple, where the Pythian priestess was consulted, a big hole in the ground over which she potentially sat, breathing in these gases. And when they excavated the temple and they dug deep down into the sub-foundations, they found nothing. And when you read the publications from around that time, particularly at the very turn of the turn of the 20th century, when in Victorian England there was a massive interest in psychological research and the paranormal and the extraterrestrial, you find patent disappointment in the fact that the ancient world seemed to have lied about how the Pythian priestess was inspired. They couldn't find the hole in the ground, and so the result was that the ancients must have lied. It's a big con trick. The Pythian priestess was the best kind of con woman of the entire ancient world that conned everyone for 1,000 years. And it was only then in the 1990s, so almost a century later, that a geologist and historian, John Helen de Boer, came along and looked again at the geology and realised that actually, technically, it is possible for gases such as ethylene, which is kind of used to induce hallucinogenic states, could kind of gather in perhaps sufficient quantities to induce some kind of hallucinations in the Pythian priestess within the enclosed space of the temple. So suddenly, kind of 100 years after we thought the ancient Greeks were, or particularly the Delphians, had been conning us all along, we realised that technically, geologically, actually these kinds of explanations were possible. Whether they are ever the whole picture is an entirely different question. But around the Delphic Oracle, what we've done is we've gone from buying into the ancient sources to getting to grips with the reality, digging it up, and being hugely disappointed to not find what we expected, thus disbelieving and thinking the ancient world a con trick, and then again with the increase in technology and skill and observation of the area 100 years later, re-buying into that idea. So we've almost gone full cycle in that storyline. So I think, J. Matthew Reever, in answer to your question, I think we always have to keep the door slightly open to these possibilities while expertly critiquing any arguments that are put forward with constructive critical analysis. So you guys have been talking about Aesop's fables, absolutely amazing stories that we love to tell, and kind of Aesop had a connection indeed with Delphi, not a particularly happy one, it may be said, but kind of there we go. So Aesop's fables are a firm favourite. Sarah's been coming in around Russian tales, kind of the thing. I think we should share these on the Facebook page. So we'll be grabbing your comments on childhood stories from around the world and sharing these on the Facebook page. Hello Lewis, how are you doing? Because I think this is absolutely fascinating, and I think kind of understanding what makes us and different cultures still different in a world of globalization and kind of when we feel like we can go anywhere and the differences in going places gets minimalised. I think understanding where we all come from in terms of the stories that we're told as children is absolutely fascinating. So thank you. Please do keep sharing, and we'll put them all up on the Facebook page. We have to do very quickly some what's on. As you know, at Warwick, I run the Warwick Classics Network, which is there to help support the provision of teaching of classical civilization and ancient history in schools, particularly working closely with schools across Coventry and Warwickshire, but also providing resources more generally for teachers to use across the country. And we have launched recently our hashtag Ask an Academic series of videos where different members of the department at Warwick talk to particular topics on the curriculum, and you can check out those videos if you go to warwick.ac.uk/WCN, and you can check out some of the videos. And we've got a new one coming up that's going to be filmed very soon with Dr. Claire Rowan about coins and imperial images. So if you are a teacher out there, or if you are a school pupil working on classical civilization or ancient history at GCSE or AS or A level, and you want to be able to ask a question that Claire will then answer in her video that will be posted on the Warwick Classics Network page in a month or so, please do send in your questions. You can send them in via Twitter to Warwick Classnet, or you can send them directly to the Warwick Classics Network Research Fellow, which is Paul Grigsby. So that's paul.grigsby, Grigsby, at warwick.ac.uk. If you've got a chance and would like to hear me speaking kind of in the UK, I'm in New York speaking. If you happen to be in New York in the first week of April, I'm actually out in New York for my birthday this year as well, which will be a first. But I'm speaking in the conference on the 4th, 5th and 6th of April. But then I'm back in the UK as well, and on the 27th of April, as I think we've launched on the Facebook page this week, I'm going to be talking at the Buckingham History Festival. So that's on the 27th of April, 11:30 to 12:30. I'm going to be talking about ancient worlds and the connections between ancient communities, and that's happening at the Ondaatje Lecture Theatre at the Radcliffe Centre, Church Lane in Buckingham. So you can get your tickets if you Google buckinghamhistoryfestival.org and Michael Scott. You'll find your way to the tickets. Indeed, I am an Aries, Linda. Yes, indeedy. And then also on May 9th, I'm going to be talking in London at the Warwick and London campus at the Knowledge Centre just by King's Cross. And I'm going to be talking about visualising the ancient world, and particularly the ancient Greek world, thinking about some of the 3D and virtual reality visualizations we've been doing in recent TV series like Ancient Invisible Cities. So you can also get those tickets are free for the Warwick in London event. So do go online. If you Google Warwick in London and Michael Scott, you will get to the booking page. You do need to book in advance, or you can go via the Facebook page as well, where we've put a link out. And I also wanted to do a shout out for the 52nd Jacked Greek Summer School, which is happening on the Sunday the 28th of July through to the Saturday 10th of August at Bryanston. If you are interested in learning ancient Greek, I did the Bryanston Summer School many years ago, back in 1998, and still have great friends from that summer school, so definitely worth doing if you have no experience of ancient Greek and you want to get some. If you're thinking about going to do classics at university, or you've got a place, definitely get on this course before you go, because it will give you a great starter for 10, which means that you're really ahead of the game when you turn up. And it's a great fun chance to spend some time with a couple of hundred people who really, really like studying ancient Greek as well. And you get to put on an ancient Greek play in Greek at the theatre, at the ancient Greek theatre that they have at Bryanston School as well. So you need to apply by the 31st of March, so the deadline is coming up soon. And if you, the application is to www.greeksummerschool.org. There we go. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. We've got just a minute or two for questions. Hello, Latifa, you right? Hello, James, how are you doing? We have got one more question. Right, Linda, there you go. You asked this one. Why are so many ancient Egyptian statues, like the Sphinx, missing their noses? How do they smell? Awful. They look as if the nose has been targeted for removal. Ooh. Well, you have opened up a can of worms, Linda, a can of worms, because the story about how the Sphinx lost its nose is wrapped in mystery, which is then kind of enveloped in a little dash of kind of mystery with a capital M, a capital Y, and exotic mystery, and perhaps even there might be some aliens involved. Who knows? Who knows? There are lots of stories going around mind around why the Sphinx doesn't have its nose. And one thing, it's a practical thing. The nose is a bit of stone on lots of sculptures that sticks out, and so if it's a sculpture that can easily be moved around, the nose is one of the things that tends to get bashed and knocked off, just like hands do, just like other appendages of the body do as well. But in terms of the Sphinx, it wasn't necessarily being moved around and bashed around. There are two kind of main stories as to why the Sphinx has lost its nose. One blames Napoleon, who might have taken it off with some kind of cannonball when he was popping through Egypt, but actually kind of the physical photographs, the records of the Sphinx show that the nose was gone before Napoleon got there. So a number of people actually talk about 1378 as being the key date when the Mohammed Saim al-Daha was kind of appalled by the fact that local people seem to be worshipping the Sphinx in order to get the Nile floods under control, to ensure the harvests continued. And he was so appalled by this worship of a pagan object that he cut off its nose to spite its face, to try and kind of disencourage or kind of stop people from worshipping it as an idol and return to what he saw as the true faith. So there we go. The Sphinx has lost its nose. I think there's lots of sculptors who've lost their nose. They don't all have as good a story as the Sphinx, but there we go. There's some of the reasons how that nose has come to be lost. And does it look, if we put it back now, would the Sphinx look as good? I don't think it would. I think we've kind of got used to it. It's like the Aphrodite, Venus de Milo, kind of without her arms, as in Disney's Hercules, when Hercules takes off her arms and Meg goes, well, she really just looks better that way. I think the Sphinx, it kind of holds a special place in our heart, especially because it's got no nose. There we go. So everyone, thank you so much for your great questions. As always, lots more we didn't have a chance to get through, but they will be on the list for next week. Keep sending in your questions, please. These sessions are all about you and your questions, and I absolutely adore answering them. So please do remember to send in your questions, and we must get some questions coming in from Indonesia as well as from different parts of the world. Let us know where you're sending your question in from as well, and don't forget that competition for 6,000 followers coming up on the Facebook page very soon. Have a lovely rest of the week, and I will see you next week. Take care.